They thought humans were easy prey, soft things, brief sparks that burned out quick. Then they trapped one and learned what cornered really meant. The Cricks lived for 400 years. Their bones were ceramic composites, their blood clotted in vacuum. They'd conquered 17 star systems before humans figured out fire. So when the human ship limped into Sector 88, bleeding atmosphere and trailing debris like a dying comet, the Cricks patrol fleet didn't bother with protocols. They just circled. Commander Vektash watched the human vessel through his bridge display, mandibles clicking in what might have been laughter if the Cricks had lungs to laugh with. The thing was a wreck. Hull plating peeled back like burnt skin, one engine completely dark, life support flickering. Analysis, he said. His tactical officer's carapace gleamed under the red combat lighting. Single occupant, male, designation, civilian merchant class. Vessel designation, long haul. Standard human freighter. Age, 43 cycles. 43 human cycles. Practically a child by Crick's standards. Vektash's secondary arms twitched. Weapons? None detected. The vessel was carrying agricultural supplies before the reactor breach. No military classification. Perfect. The Dominion wanted a human. Live capture. Something about studying their neural patterns, understanding why such fragile creatures kept expanding into territories they had no business occupying. Vektash didn't care about the why. He cared about the promotion. 3 of his hunters were already moving into position. Dreadnoughts, each one capable of glassing a moon, and the human's ship looked like a tin can someone had stepped on. "Hail them," Vektash ordered. The comm crackled. Then a voice, rough and tired, speaking in clumsy Dominion standard. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the Long Haul. I've got a busted reactor and about 6 hours of air left. If you're looking to help, I'd appreciate it. If not, maybe give a guy some space to die with dignity." Vektash's mandibles spread wider. "Dignity? Captain Webb," he said, letting his translator software turn his clicks into something approximating human speech. "This is Commander Vektash of the Crick's 3rd Fleet. Your vessel is in violation of Dominion space. You will surrender immediately." Silence on the other end. Then, "Yeah, about that. My nav computer's been telling me I'm in open territory for the last 3 weeks. I think there might be a map discrepancy." "There is no discrepancy. Surrender." "And if I don't?" Vektash tilted his head. The gesture meant nothing to humans, but his crew understood. "Then we will disable your vessel and extract you manually." Another pause. Longer this time. "Manually sounds painful." "It is." "Right. Well, how about this? You let me limp to the nearest station. I promise to file the appropriate apology forms, and we all go home without anyone getting extracted." Vektash almost admired it. The human was negotiating while his ship fell apart around him, like a prey animal trying to bargain with its teeth. "I'm afraid that is not an option, Captain Webb." "Figured as much." The human's voice changed, flatter, colder. "I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page before things get stupid." Before Vektash could respond, the long haul moved. Not much, just a single thruster burst that sent the wreck tumbling into a debris field the patrol had been using for target practice. Old asteroids, chunks of destroyed ships, frozen waste from a mining operation that went bust 60 years ago. "Clever. Pursue," Vektash ordered. "Disable engines." His hunters moved in. 3 massive ships closing on one dying freighter. It wasn't even a fight. The human's shields were gone, his weapons offline. All he could do was run, and he ran beautifully. The long haul threaded through the debris like a needle through cloth, rolling and diving in ways that should have torn the ship apart. The Vektash watched the human's trajectory predict 3 moves ahead and realized the man wasn't running blind. He was leading them. "Commander," his tactical officer said, "he's heading for the scrap belt." Vektash knew the belt, a graveyard of Crick's warships from the Consolidation Wars. Hundreds of wrecks, each one still leaking radiation and unstable munitions. Nobody went there. Nobody sane. "He's trying to lose us in the debris," Vektash said. "Close the net. Box him in." But the human didn't stop at the belt's edge. He went in. The long haul disappeared into a cloud of metal fragments and frozen gas, and Vektash's hunters followed. Their sensors immediately started screaming. Too much interference. Too much floating metal. One of his ships clipped a dead destroyer and had to peel off, hull sparking. Then the human's ship vanished from their scopes entirely. "Find him!" Vektash snapped. They searched for 20 minutes, scanning every heat signature, every magnetic anomaly. The human should have been easy to track. His reactor was dying. He was leaving a trail of coolant and burned fuel. But there was nothing. "Commander," his tactical officer said quietly, "I'm reading a power signature. Sector 88 Delta, inside the wreck of the Dalathar." The Dalathar, a Krix carrier that had taken a fusion warhead to the bridge during the Third Uprising. The entire vessel was a radiation tomb. He went inside. "Yes, Commander." Vektash felt something unfamiliar crawl along his spine. Not fear. The Krix didn't fear, but something close. A recognition that the prey was behaving wrong. "Deploy boarding teams. 2 squads. Full combat gear." "Commander, the radiation levels—" "I am aware of the radiation. Deploy the teams." The squads went in through the Dalathar's torn hull, their armor lights cutting through the dark. Vektash watched through their helmet feeds. Corridors like throats. Walls twisted by heat. Bodies still floating in the zero-G. Frozen Krix warriors locked in their last moments. They found the long haul in what used to be a hangar bay. The ship was powered down. Dark. Cold. Empty. "Captain Webb," the squad leader called out, his voice echoing through the dead carrier. "You are surrounded. Surrender now, and you will not be harmed." No response. They swept the long haul deck by deck. Found the cargo hold still full of grain containers. Found the cockpit with its jury-rigged controls and a coffee cup still floating near the pilot's seat. No human. "He's here," Vektash said. He has to be." The squad leader moved deeper into the hangar. His team spread out in practiced formation, weapons up, scanning every shadow. The radiation was already creeping through their suits. They had maybe an hour before the exposure started killing them. Then one of the soldiers stopped. "Commander, I have a heat signature. Behind the wreckage pilot coordinates." The explosion wasn't large. Just a pressurized fuel canister from the long haul, rigged with a timing mechanism and hidden in the debris. But in zero-G, in an enclosed space, it was enough. The blast tore through the hangar like a fist. Armor cracked, bodies tumbled. The feed from 3 soldiers went dark immediately. And then, through the chaos and the static and the screaming, Vektash saw him, Marcus Webb. He wasn't wearing a suit, and just his ship clothes and a makeshift rebreather cobbled together from duct tape and spare parts. His face was red from burst capillaries. His hands were shaking from the cold. But he was moving. He'd been hiding in the wreckage the whole time, waiting for them to cluster. The human grabbed a rifle from one of the floating bodies and fired 3 shots. 2 soldiers down. The third took cover behind a structural beam, shouting into his comm. "Contact! Contact! The human is—" Webb put a round through the beam. The soldier's suit decompressed. He spun away, clawing at his helmet. The squad leader fired back, his plasma rifle lighting up the hangar like a strobe. But Webb was already gone, diving through a torn bulkhead into the carrier's deeper sections. "After him!" Vektash roared. "Do not let him escape!" The remaining soldiers gave chase, their helmet feeds bouncing and shaking as they ran through the Dalathar's corpse. They could hear the human ahead of them, boots on metal, ragged breathing. He was injured, slowing down. They had him. The corridor opened into what used to be a crew quarter, bunks torn from the walls, lockers floating open. The soldiers swept in fast, weapons covering every angle. Webb was at the far end, backed against a sealed door. No weapon, no suit, Just a man who looked like he'd been dead for a week but hadn't noticed yet. "Surrender," the squad leader said. Webb looked at him. Then he looked at the door behind him. Then back at the soldiers. "You know what's behind this door?" he asked. The squad leader didn't answer. "Reactor core," Webb said. "Still critical. Still leaking. Your sensors probably can't read it through all the interference, but trust me, it's hot." "You're bluffing." Webb pulled something from his pocket. A detonator. Crude. Made from scavenged components, but functional. "I'm really not." The squad leader's mandibles froze. "If you trigger that, you'll die." "Yeah," Webb said. "I know." And for the first time since the hunt began, Vektash understood what he was looking at. Not prey. A cornered animal. The human's hand tightened on the detonator. His eyes weren't scared. They weren't angry. They were just decided. "Here's the thing about humans," Webb said quietly. "We don't surrender well." The squad leader's rifle wavered. "Commander?" Vektash watched through the feed. Watched the human standing there with one hand on a bomb and the other pressed against his ribs where something was probably broken. Watched him take one step forward. Just one. The soldiers took 3 steps back. "Stand down," Vektash said. "Commander?" "I said stand down. Withdraw to the extraction point." The soldiers retreated, keeping their weapons trained on Webb until they cleared the corridor. The human didn't move, just stood there in the dark, holding his bomb, breathing through his failing rebreather. When they were gone, he lowered the detonator. His hands were shaking worse now. The cold was eating through him. The radiation was cooking him from the inside. He had minutes, maybe, before his body quit, but he'd made them flinch. Vektash watched the human sink against the wall, watched his eyes close, watched the rebreather fog and clear and fog again. "Fascinating," he said quietly. His tactical officer turned. "Commander, mark these coordinates. Forward them to Dominion Research. Tell them we found something interesting." "The human?" "Yes, the human." Vektash stared at the screen. At the dying man who'd led 3 warships into a graveyard and turned the hunters into the hunted. Who'd stood alone in the dark and made soldiers in million-credit armor back down with nothing but a homemade explosive and the look in his eyes. The Cricks had studied 17 species before humans. None of them had ever done that. "Prepare a medical team," Vektash said. "Full decontamination gear. I want him alive." "Sir, the radiation exposure..." "I know. Do it anyway." Because the Dominion wanted a human to study, and Commander Vektash had just learned something more valuable than any promotion. When you corner a human, you don't learn their weaknesses. You learn why they survived this long. Webb woke up in white. Not the white of stars, not the white of clean rooms or hospital wings. This was the white of nothing, antiseptic, absolute. The kind of white that erased everything before it. His chest hurt, his ribs hurt, his eyes hurt. Everything hurt in that specific way that meant someone had worked very hard to keep him from dying. Captain Webb. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Synthesized, neutral, probably running through a dozen translation matrices before it reached his ears in something resembling English. He tried to sit up. Couldn't. Something was holding him down. Not restraints, just weakness. His body felt like it had been disassembled and put back together by someone reading the instructions in a language they didn't speak. "Where am I?" "Dominion Medical Research Station 12. "You have been unconscious for 6 days." "6 days? Jesus. Am I a prisoner?" "You are a subject of study." "Same thing, really." Webb forced his eyes to focus. The white resolved into walls, ceiling, some kind of gel bed that molded around him like it was alive. Medical equipment he didn't recognize. And standing at the foot of the bed, a figure that looked like someone had tried to build a mantis out of nightmares and military-grade ceramics. Vektash. The Crick's commander stood perfectly still, watching him with compound eyes that caught the light wrong. His mandibles were closed, His secondary arms folded across his thorax in something that might have been a formal posture, or might have been the alien equivalent of crossing your arms. "You should be dead," Vektash said. "Yeah, well, I'm inconvenient like that. The radiation exposure alone should have killed you. The cold, the decompression damage. Our medical team says you should not have survived the extraction." Webb tried to shrug. "Managed about half of one. Human biology. We're weirdly stubborn about the whole living thing." Stubborn. Vektash's mandibles clicked. Not quite laughter. Not quite anything Webb could read. An interesting word choice. You got a better one? Irrational. Fair. Webb finally got his head to turn enough to see the rest of the room. It wasn't a cell. Too clean for that. Too much equipment. This was a lab, and he was the experiment. "So what now?" he asked. "You going to dissect me? Run tests? Figure out what makes humans tick so you can exploit it?" "The Dominion Council has authorized a comprehensive study of human behavioral patterns. You will be kept comfortable. Fed. Provided with entertainment suitable to your species. Sounds nice. You will also be questioned extensively about human military capabilities, expansion patterns, and cultural tendencies." Ah, there it is. Vektash moved closer. His carapace caught the light, all angles and edges. Webb had seen Cricks before, in trading posts and diplomatic channels. They always looked like they were 1 second away from taking your head off. This one looked like he'd already decided to and was just being polite about the timing. "You led 3 warships into a debris field," Vektash said. "Disabled 2 of them, killed 9 of my soldiers, and forced a tactical retreat using improvised explosives and psychological warfare. That a question? You are a civilian merchant, no military training, no combat experience. Your vessel was dying. You had no weapons, no support, no chance of survival." Webb met those alien eyes. "Still here, though." "Yes, you are." Vektash tilted his head. "Why? Why what? Why fight? You could have surrendered. We would have taken you prisoner, treated you according to Dominion law. You would have been processed and eventually returned to human space through diplomatic channels." Webb laughed. It hurt his ribs, but he couldn't stop. "You really believe that?" "It is protocol." "Protocol?" Webb shook his head. "Yeah, I'm sure you guys follow that real careful when nobody's watching. No, Commander. You were going to stick me in a lab just like this one and take me apart to see how I worked. Only difference is, I made you work for it." Vektash was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You are correct. The Dominion Council's interest in human specimens predates your capture. You would have been studied regardless of your cooperation." At least he was honest about it. "So why'd you save me?" Webb asked. "Could have let me die in that reactor core. Would have been easier." "Because you did something no Cricks would do." "What's that?" "You chose certain death over possible capture." Webb felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, just recognition. "And that interests you?" "It terrifies me." The words hung in the white room like smoke. Vektash's mandibles opened and closed in a pattern Webb couldn't read. The commander paced to the window, if that's what it was, and looked out at whatever lay beyond. His reflection in the glass was all sharp edges and darker shadows. "The Cricks have been the dominant military power in this sector for 600 years, Vektash said quietly. "We have fought 17 species, conquered 12, absorbed 3 into the Dominion. 2 went extinct resisting us. Every species we encountered followed predictable patterns. They fought when they had advantage, retreated when they did not, surrendered when death was certain. Let me guess, humans don't do that." "Humans do not do that." Vektash turned back to him. 3 years ago, we encountered your colony on Epsilon Ceti, a mining operation. 43 personnel, no military presence. We sent a diplomatic envoy to discuss terms of Dominion incorporation. Webb already knew where this was going. Your miners refused. We sent a larger force to encourage cooperation. They destroyed their own mine, collapsed the tunnels, sealed themselves inside with enough air for perhaps 6 days. How long did they last? 19 days. Christ. They had improvised recycling systems, rationed food, organized shifts to conserve oxygen. When we finally breached the tunnels, we found them still alive. Barely, but alive and armed. Vektosh's voice had changed. Not scared. The Cricks didn't get scared. But something close, something that recognized a threat it couldn't quite categorize. They fought us in the tunnels for 2 more days, with mining equipment, with their hands. One of them used a broken oxygen tank as a club until his arms gave out. When we finally secured the facility, 12 of my soldiers were dead. 40 Cricks, dead, killed by miners. Webb said nothing. And when we interrogated the survivors, do you know what they said? What? They said they were waiting for the cavalry. Webb felt something hot in his throat. Pride, maybe, or grief, or both. There was no cavalry coming, Vektosh continued. No human fleet in range, no possibility of rescue. They knew this, and they fought anyway. That's what we do. Why? Good question. Webb stared at the white ceiling, thought about the long haul, about 43 years of hauling grain and machine parts across the outer colonies, about the miners on Epsilon Ceti who died waiting for help that was never coming. Because surrendering is a choice, he said finally. And we're real bad at making the smart choice when it means giving up. That is not tactical. That is not logical. No, it's not. It is insane. Yeah, probably. Vektosh moved closer to the bed. His shadow fell across Webb like something solid. The Dominion Council wants to understand this. They believe if we can identify the psychological mechanism that drives human resistance, we can exploit it, break it, turn your species into compliant subjects like the others. Good luck with that. You misunderstand me, Captain Webb. I do not believe it is possible. That got Webb's attention. Vektosh's mandibles spread in what might have been the Crick's equivalent of a bitter smile. I have studied your species for 3 years. Watched your colonies expand into territories no sane race would settle. Watched you build cities on worlds that should kill you within hours. Watched you fight wars against enemies you cannot possibly defeat and somehow survive them. We're stubborn. You are broken. The word hit different coming from an alien. Every species has a survival threshold, Vektosh continued, a point where self-preservation overrides all other imperatives, where the cost becomes too high and the rational choice is submission. The Cricks have this threshold, the Velcana have it, the Gorath. Every species we have encountered can be made to surrender if the pain becomes sufficient. But not humans. But not humans. Vektosh's eyes caught the light. You do not have a threshold, or if you do, it is set at a point beyond death, beyond extinction. You will fight past the point where fighting is possible. You will die rather than submit. Not because you believe you can win, but because the alternative is unacceptable to you on a level that transcends reason. Webb felt his hands clench. Weak, but clenching. That's supposed to be a compliment? It is a warning. Vektosh turned away, looked back at the window. The Dominion Council believes humanity can be conquered, pacified, incorporated into the greater whole. They are preparing a full military campaign against your outer colonies. 3 battle fleets, enough firepower to glass 50 worlds. Why are you telling me this? Because I have seen what happens when the Cricks hunt humans, and I do not believe we will win. The room went very quiet. Webb stared at the alien's back, at the commander who'd captured him and saved him and was now telling him about an invasion that would kill billions. You think we'll stop you? I think you will fight us until there is nothing left to fight with, and then you will keep fighting. And I think that even if we destroy every human world, every human ship, every human settlement in known space, Vektosh's mandibles clicked rapidly. I think one of you will survive. Somewhere, and that one will remember, and plan, and wait. Damn right. And that is why you terrify me." Vektash finally turned, looked at Webb with those alien eyes that saw too much. "The Cricks live for 400 years. We think in centuries. We plan in millennia. We have time to wait out any threat. But humans?" He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Humans do not wait. You act. You adapt. You improvise. You turn cargo haulers into warships and miners into soldiers, and somehow, impossibly, you survive." Webb felt something shift in the White Room. Some understanding that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't quite hostility either. "So what are you going to do about it?" he asked. "I am going to recommend the Council cancel the invasion." "They going to listen?" "No." "Then what's the point?" Vektash moved to the door, paused. "The point, Captain Webb, is that when the invasion fails, and it will fail, I will have documentation proving I warned them. And when the survivors ask how humanity defeated the Crick's Third Fleet, I will show them this conversation. And perhaps, the Dominion will learn what I learned in the Dalathar." "What's that?" The commander's mandibles spread. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything human would recognize. And but close. "Never corner a human?" The door sealed behind him. Webb was alone again in the White. But the White felt different now. Less like a cage, more like a waiting room. He settled back into the gel bed. Let his broken ribs rest. Let his radiation-cooked cells try to remember how to function. Let his mind run through everything Vektash had said. 3 battle fleets, 50 worlds. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was preparing to hit humanity with everything it had. Probably figured humans would fold like every other species. Probably had nice, neat projections about casualty rates and occupation timelines and how long it would take to process 7 billion souls into compliant subjects. Webb closed his eyes. They were going to be so disappointed. Because the thing about humans, the thing that Vektash understood and the Dominion Council didn't, was that you couldn't make them quit. You could kill them. Sure, that was easy. Humans died all the time. But make them surrender? Make them accept defeat? That took something humans didn't have. Self-preservation instincts that worked right. Webb drifted towards something like sleep. His mind already working through the math. How long before the invasion? How long before news reached human space? How long before the colonies started preparing? Not long enough. Never long enough. But humans had fought long odds before. Had taken on impossible threats and somehow pulled through. Sometimes by being smarter. Sometimes by being tougher. Mostly by just refusing to die when they were supposed to. The White Room hummed with medical equipment. So somewhere beyond the walls, Crick's technicians were probably analyzing his blood, his tissues, his neural patterns. Looking for the secret, the weakness. The thing that made humans human, so they could cut it out. Good luck, Webb thought, because the thing that made humans human wasn't something you could isolate in a lab. It was the choice. The choice to fight when fighting was stupid. To stand when falling was smarter. To take that first step forward when every rational calculation said to step back. Vektash had seen it in the Dalathar. Seen Webb holding that detonator with hands that could barely function and eyes that knew exactly what he was choosing. And the Crick's commander had blinked. Not because Webb was stronger, not because humans were tougher, but because in that moment, facing down a creature that could have killed him a dozen different ways, Webb had made them understand something fundamental. The cost of taking him was higher than they wanted to pay. That was the secret. That was what Vektash was trying to tell the Council, and what the Council would never understand until it was too late. Humans didn't fight to win. They fought to make losing too expensive. And when you cornered something that thought like that, when you backed it into a space where the only options were death or submission, you didn't get surrender. You got teeth. Webb smiled in the White Room. 3 battle fleets. They had no idea what they were walking into. The invasion came 3 months later. Webb watched it happen from his White Room, and now equipped with a display screen the Cricks had installed so he could witness what they called the integration process. They thought it would break him. Watching human colonies burn, watching defense fleets crumble against Dominion firepower. They were half right. It broke something, just not the thing they wanted. The first strike hit New Sarajevo, an agricultural colony, population 7,000, no military assets. The Dominion sent a light cruiser and 2 destroyers, standard pacification force. They broadcast surrender terms in 17 languages and waited the customary 6 hours for compliance. New Sarajevo told them to go to hell in 12 languages and opened fire with mining charges retrofitted as missiles. The display showed it all. Colonists in pressurized work suits jury-rigging plasma cutters into point defense systems, and farmers loading crop dusters with homemade explosives. Someone, Webb couldn't tell who, had somehow gotten a drilling rig operational and was using it to launch 100-ton rock slugs at the lead destroyer. It was stupid, desperate, completely ineffective against military-grade shields, and it lasted 3 days. By the time the Cricks finally secured New Sarajevo, they'd lost the light cruiser. Both destroyers were combat ineffective, and 63 Dominion soldiers were dead, killed by farmers. Vektash stood beside Webb's bed, watching the aftermath footage. The commander hadn't spoken for 20 minutes. His mandibles were completely still. 7,000 civilians, he said finally, against 3 warships. Yep, they had no chance of victory. Nope, they fought anyway. Webb nodded at the screen. That's Colony 37. You got 42 more to go. This is not sustainable. For who? Vektash turned those compound eyes on him. We have 3 battle fleets, Captain Webb, over 400 ships. We can lose vessels at this rate for years before it impacts operational capacity. Sure, if humans were the only thing you had to worry about. That got a mandible twitch. Meaning the Dominion's got 17 species under your thumb. How many you think are watching this? Seeing humans make you bleed for every inch? Seeing that maybe the big bad Cricks aren't so unstoppable after all? Silence. Webb let it sit. Let Vektash chew on the math. Because that was the other thing about humans. They weren't just fighters. They were inspiration. Every colony that made the Cricks pay, every farmer with a retrofitted mining charge, every desperate last stand broadcast across the sector. It was a message. You can fight back. The Council has authorized accelerated pacification protocols, Vektash said quietly. They are moving to orbital bombardment strategies. Webb's hands clenched. Glassing colonies. Reducing military response time and casualty rates among Dominion forces. Jesus Christ. A necessary escalation given human resistance patterns. Webb wanted to get up, wanted to grab the Cricks commander and shake him until something like conscience fell out. But his body was still recovering, and his restraints, polite, medical, but restraints, weren't going anywhere. You're making a mistake, he said. The Council does not believe so. The Council's going to learn real fast what happens when you give humans nothing left to lose. Vektash's mandibles clicked rapidly. Agitation, maybe, or the Cricks equivalent of a nervous laugh. And what is that, Captain Webb? We stop fighting to survive and start fighting to make you regret it. The screen changed. New footage. A colony Webb didn't recognize. Small settlement on a moon with barely breathable atmosphere. The Dominion fleet was already in orbit. Already broadcasting ultimatums. Then the colony detonated its own reactor core. No warning. No negotiation. Just gone. 3,200 people. Dead in an instant. And the electromagnetic pulse from the explosion fried half the fleet's sensor arrays and left them flying blind for 6 hours while they retreated to safe distance. Webb felt his throat close. 3,200 people. Dead rather than captured. Gone rather than submit. Vektash was completely still. They killed themselves. Yeah. This is insane. This is what happens when you glass colonies. Webb's voice came out rough, angry. You wanted a war? Congratulations, Commander. You got one. Not a nice clean pacification, not an integration, a real war. The kind where both sides bleed. The kind where humans look at the scoreboard and decide if they're going down, they're taking you with them. The footage kept playing, More colonies, more desperate stands. Some held for hours, some held for days. None of them surrendered, and the Cricks kept losing ships. Not fast, nothing that would turn the tide, but steady, grinding. Every human settlement cost them. Every farmer with a gun, every miner with explosives, every desperate last stand that killed 3 more Dominion soldiers. Death by 1,000 cuts. "The council is convening," Vektash said after a long silence. "There are discussions about terms." "Terms?" "A negotiated settlement, territory concessions, trade agreements, recognition of human sovereignty in certain sectors." Webb laughed. Bitter, angry. "You think humans are going to negotiate now? After you glassed how many colonies?" 17. 17. Webb shook his head. "You just gave humanity 17 reasons to never forgive you. 17 martyred settlements, 17 rallying cries. You think peace treaties matter against that?" "What do you suggest, Captain?" "I suggest you pull your fleets back. Apologize to every human government you can find, and hope to God we're feeling generous enough to accept." "That is not possible. The Dominion does not apologize. Then the Dominion's going to learn what a long war looks like." Vektash moved to the window. His reflection looked tired. Webb didn't know Cricks could look tired. Thought they were all ceramics and calculations. But this one looked like he'd been carrying weight for too long. "I warned them," the commander said quietly. "I told the council that humans were different. That standard pacification would not work. That cornering your species would not produce submission. They didn't listen. They did not listen. So what now?" Vektash turned. "Now I am being reassigned, sent to the front lines. The council believes my proximity to you has compromised my tactical judgment." Webb felt something twist. "They're making you lead the invasion." "They are making me clean up the invasion. The original fleet commanders have been removed for failing to meet operational timelines. I am to take command and restore order to the campaign." "You're going to kill more of us?" "Yes." "And you're okay with that?" Vektash's mandibles opened and closed. "I am a soldier, Captain Webb. I follow orders, but I am also capable of learning. And what I have learned these past months is that this war cannot be won through force alone. So what's your plan?" "I do not have one yet, but I know what will not work." He gestured at the screen where another colony was preparing for orbital bombardment. "Terror does not break humans, it hardens them. Death does not frighten humans, it inspires them. Every atrocity the Dominion commits makes the next human settlement fight harder." "Yeah, we're funny like that." "It is not funny, Captain. It is tragic. Millions will die, on both sides. And for what? Territory? Resources? Pride? For the principle." Vektash stared at him. "The principle. That nobody tells humans what to do. That nobody makes us kneel. That we choose our own path, even if that path leads straight to hell." Webb met those alien eyes. "You asked me why we fight when we can't win. That's why. Because the alternative is letting someone else make our choices for us. And humans don't do that. Ever. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then." The room went quiet. Just the hum of medical equipment and the distant vibration of the station's drives. Two beings from different worlds, different biologies, different ways of thinking. But in that moment, they understood each other. Vektash understood what he was up against. Webb understood what was coming. "Yeah, I will do what I can," Vektash said. "Try to minimize casualties. Push for negotiations. Present evidence to the council that continued aggression is counterproductive. They gonna listen this time? No, but it will be documented, and when this war ends," he paused. "However it ends, there will be a record that some Cricks tried to stop it." Webb nodded. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Vektash moved toward the door. Stopped. "Captain Webb, when I take command of the front, I will release you." "What?" "You will be escorted to neutral territory and released to human custody. The council believes you have provided sufficient data for their studies. Your continued imprisonment serves no purpose." "You're letting me go." I am letting you go home to warn your people." Vektosh's mandibles spread, not quite a smile. Not quite anything Webb could read, but close. "Because I believe you will be more useful to the Cricks as a message than as a prisoner." "What message?" "That some of us can learn. That some of us understand what you are. That if humanity and the Dominion are to coexist, it will require mutual respect. Not conquest, not submission. Respect." Webb felt something hot behind his eyes. "They're going to think you're weak. Let them. I would rather be weak and alive than proud and extinct." The door opened. Closed. Vektosh was gone. Webb sat alone in the white room with the screen still showing colony after colony burning. Fighting. Dying. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he was already composing the report, the warning he'd carry back to human space. They're coming. They're scared. And scared enemies make mistakes. 3 days later, they loaded him onto a transport. No ceremony, no dramatics. Just a Crick's medical team making sure he'd survived the trip and a neutral courier willing to take human cargo for enough credits. Webb watched the station recede through the transport's viewport. Watched the Dominion fleets gathering. Watched warships by the dozen preparing for campaigns that would kill millions. And he thought about Vektosh, about the Crick's commander who'd hunted him, captured him, studied him, and learned the one thing the Dominion Council refused to accept. Humans don't break. The transport jumped to FTL. Stars stretched, space folded, and Marcus Webb went home carrying a warning the Dominion didn't know it had sent. That humanity had been underestimated. That the Cricks had learned too late what cornered really meant. That the next time they met in battle, it wouldn't be hunters circling prey. It would be two species that had seen each other's teeth, and neither was willing to blink first. Webb made it to Armstrong Station 8 days later. Barely. The neutral courier dumped him at the edge of human space with a medical report and a data stick containing footage of the Dominion invasion. No explanation, no context. Just Webb and his radiation scars, and a warning nobody was ready to hear. The station commander took one look at him and sent for military intelligence. They arrived 6 hours later. 3 officers in Colonial Defense Force uniforms and enough recording equipment to document a war crimes trial. They set up in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and old coffee and started asking questions. Webb told them everything: the hunt, the capture, the research station, Vektosh's warnings, the invasion footage, the 17 glassed colonies, the miners fighting with tools, the farmers loading crop dusters with explosives, the settlement that chose death over surrender. He told them about the Crick's psychology, about how they thought in centuries but couldn't understand minutes, about how they'd studied 17 species and broken 12 but couldn't crack the one that refused to calculate odds before fighting. He told them humanity was different, that humans were broken in ways that made them unbreakable. The officers listened, took notes, asked follow-up questions about fleet compositions and weapon capabilities, and estimated timelines. Professional, detached, like they were cataloguing data instead of counting the dead. Then the youngest one, lieutenant with fresh insignia and eyes that hadn't seen combat, asked the question Webb had been dreading. How do we win? Webb stared at his hands, at the radiation-burned scars, at the tremor that hadn't gone away since the Dalathar. We don't. Silence. Sir, we don't win. Not the way you're thinking. Webb looked up at the 3 officers, at the clean uniforms and the confident postures, and the belief that wars had winners. The Dominion's got 400 ships. We've got maybe 40 that can stand against them. They've got technology we won't match for decades. They've got alliances with species that have been spacefaring since before humans invented writing. Then what do? We make them quit. The senior officer leaned forward, older, grey at the temples, so ribbons on her chest that suggested she'd seen some things. Elaborate. Webb pulled up the data stick footage on the room's display, showed them New Sarajevo, showed them the mining colony, showed them 17 settlements burning. Every one of these colonies made the Cricks bleed, he said. Not enough to stop them, but enough to matter. Enough to make each victory cost more than the Dominion budgeted. You stack enough of those costs, eventually they start asking if the territory's worth it. That's a war of attrition. That's the only war we can fight. Millions will die. Millions are already dead. Webb's voice came out harder than he meant. 17 colonies, gone. And the Cricks are just getting started. You want to save lives? You want to win? Then we stop thinking about beating them in fleet engagements and start thinking about making every inch they take cost them something they can't afford to lose. Like what? Time, ships, soldiers, political capital. Webb pointed at the footage. Vektash told me the council's already arguing about the invasion. Some want escalation, some want negotiation. Every human that makes them pay, every colony that holds longer than projected, every unexpected casualty. It's a vote for negotiation, for ending this before it becomes a forever war. The lieutenant was taking notes, fast. You're talking about insurgency tactics. I'm talking about survival tactics, fighting smart when you can't fight strong. Webb looked at each of them. The Cricks conquered 12 species by being overwhelming, by showing up with enough force that surrender was the rational choice. But humans aren't rational. Not about this. And if we make that our strength instead of our weakness, if we fight the way Vektash is terrified, we'll fight. We have a chance. We have a chance. The senior officer sat back, thinking, processing. You said this Commander Vektash is being reassigned to lead the invasion. He's taking over for the commanders who failed to meet timelines. And he let you go. He wanted humans to know what's coming, wanted someone who understood the Cricks to prepare our response. That seems tactically unsound. Webb smiled, bitter. Vektash doesn't want this war. He knows what happens when you corner humans. He's hoping that if we're prepared, if we know what they're capable of, maybe we'll find a way to end it that doesn't cost both species everything. Do you believe that's possible? I believe Vektash does. And I believe there are more Cricks like him than the Dominion Council realizes. Which means there's a split between the ones who want conquest and the ones who've learned humans are expensive to conquer. Can we exploit that? Maybe, if we're smart. If we can show the moderates that continued aggression costs more than it's worth. That humanity's not going away. That the only end to this war is negotiation or extinction. The room went quiet again. Just 3 officers and 1 civilian merchant trying to figure out how to survive species-level conflict with enemies who thought in timescales longer than human civilizations. Finally, the senior officer stood. We'll forward your report to Colonial Command. I recommend immediate defensive preparations and strategic consultations. You've given us actionable intelligence, Captain Webb. Will they listen? She met his eyes. They'll listen. Whether they'll act is another question. Fair enough. They processed him through medical. More scans, more tests. Confirming what the Cricks doctors had done to keep him alive and what they couldn't fix. The radiation damage was permanent. Cellular level. He'd live, probably, but not long. 20 years if he was lucky. 10 if he wasn't. Small price for carrying the warning home. Webb spent 2 weeks on Armstrong Station while Colonial Command decided what to do with him. Mostly he sat in the observation lounge watching ships come and go, thinking about Vektash and the invasion and the 17 colonies that had chosen fire over chains. On the 3rd week, the orders came through. Colonial Command wanted him on Earth, wanted him to brief the Unified Defense Council, wanted every detail about Crick's psychology, invasion doctrine, and the commander who'd let him go. So Webb went. The trip took 4 weeks. 4 weeks of jump after jump through human space that looked different now. More military vessels, more patrol routes, more colonies broadcasting readiness drills and evacuation protocols. Humanity was preparing. Not for victory, not for defense, for survival. Earth looked the same as Webb remembered, blue and green and covered in lights that marked 10 billion souls going about their lives. Most didn't know about the invasion yet. It was classified. Need to know. No point starting a panic before the shooting started. But the ones who knew, military command, colonial governors, defense contractors, they knew. And they were getting ready. Webb briefed the Defense Council in a room buried 300 meters below Geneva. 37 people representing every human government, military branch, and major colony. They listened to his report, watched the footage, asked the same questions Armstrong Station's officers had asked. How do we win? Webb gave them the same answer. We don't, we make them quit. The debate lasted 6 hours. Some wanted immediate counterattack, preemptive strikes against Dominion staging areas. Hit them before they hit us. Others wanted diplomacy, open channels, negotiate before more colonies burned. Webb sat through it all, watching humans do what they did best. Argue about the how while agreeing on the what. Nobody suggested surrender. Nobody proposed accepting Dominion terms. The question wasn't whether to fight, just how to fight smart. In the end, they voted on a strategy that would have made Vektash smile. Dispersed defense. No concentrated fleets for the Criks to destroy. Every colony becomes a fortress. Every settlement gets weapons and training and plans for last stands that cost more than territory's worth. Make the Dominion choose between genocide and negotiation. And in the background, quiet diplomacy. Reaching out to other Dominion species. The ones Vektash mentioned. The 12 conquered. The 3 absorbed. Asking questions. Planting seeds. Building coalitions. Fighting the political war while the shooting war bought time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. It was going to cost lives. But it was human. Stubborn and irrational, and absolutely refusing to accept that being outgunned meant being beaten. Webb got his final assignment 3 days after the council meeting. Not military command, not colonial defense, something else. Ambassador, special diplomatic position, his job, talk to any Criks willing to listen, find the moderates, the ones who thought like Vektash, the ones who could be convinced that mutual survival beat mutual extinction. It was a long shot, probably wouldn't work, probably going to get him killed. Webb took it anyway, because that's what humans did. Long shots and bad odds and plans that shouldn't work, but somehow did. 6 months later, the Dominion's second wave hit the outer colonies. 3 battle fleets, 400 ships. Enough firepower to crack planets. They expected resistance. They got warfare. Not the kind they'd trained for. Not fleet engagements and orbital bombardments and clean military victories. This was fighting in asteroid fields, ambushes in debris clouds, colonies that turned themselves into fortresses and made every corridor cost lives. Farmers and miners and merchants who'd trained with weapons they'd built themselves and knew every meter of their territory. The Criks took the colonies. Eventually. But the butcher's bill was higher than any Dominion war in 300 years. And back on their homeworlds, the other species were watching. Seeing the mighty Criks bleed. Seeing that maybe conquest wasn't inevitable. That maybe resistance was possible. Small rebellions started. Nothing major. Just enough to remind the Dominion that holding 12 species required resources they were burning in human space. Vektash sent Webb a message on an encrypted channel. Single line. No preamble. They are listening now. The war ground on. Months turned to years. Colonies burned. Fleets clashed. The death toll climbed into the millions. But humanity didn't break. And the Dominion started cracking. Not fast. Not obviously, just hairline fractures in the consensus that humans needed to be conquered. Voices in the council suggesting negotiation. Commanders requesting reassignment rather than lead human campaigns. Species inside the Dominion asking why resources were being spent breaking one stubborn race instead of maintaining control over 12 others. 4 years after Webb's capture, the Dominion Council voted to open diplomatic channels, not surrender. Not treaty, just talks. Webb was there, ambassador to the Dominion, sitting across from Crick's councillors in a neutral station while both sides tried to find words for peace that didn't sound like submission. It took 2 years. 2 years of negotiation and setbacks and walking away from tables and coming back. 2 years of humans dying in scattered engagements while politicians argued over borders and trade rights and recognition of sovereignty. But eventually, slowly, like water wearing down stone, they found terms both sides could accept. Mutual recognition, defined territories, trade agreements. A promise that humanity would stay in its space and the Dominion would stay in theirs. No reparations for the glassed colonies. No punishment for the invasion. No acknowledgement that either side had won. Just an agreement to stop killing each other. Webb signed the treaty with hands that shook from radiation damage. Watched the Crick's representatives, including Vektash, promoted to counselor for his handling of the late war negotiations, add their marks. It wasn't justice, it wasn't victory, but it was survival for both species. Afterward, Vektash found him in the observation lounge, the same one where they'd first talked, where the commander had admitted what he feared about humanity. "You were right," Vektash said. "About? That cornering humans was a mistake." Webb stared out at the stars, at the space that contained both human colonies and Crick's worlds and all the species caught between. "You learned. At considerable cost." "Yeah, we both did." They stood in silence. Two beings who'd been enemies and prisoners and something like friends, who'd watched their species nearly destroy each other and somehow pulled back from the edge. "The Council wants to study you," Vektash said. "Not as specimens. As partners. They believe humanity has qualities the Dominion lacks. Adaptability, innovation, creative problem solving under pressure. That a nice way of saying we're crazy? That is a nice way of saying you think differently. And the Dominion has learned that different thinking has value." Webb turned, looked at the Crick's counselor. "What about you? What did you learn?" Vektash's mandibles spread in that almost smile. "I learned that survival instincts are not always about self-preservation. Sometimes survival means standing when falling is easier, fighting when surrender is rational, taking that first step forward when every calculation says to step back. And I learned that humanity's refusal to quit is not a flaw to exploit. It is a strength to respect." Webb felt something tight in his chest. Not grief, not pride. There's something between. "A lot of people died teaching you that. I know, and I will carry that weight until my carapace returns to sand." Vektash looked out at the stars. But their deaths were not meaningless. They taught the Dominion what conquest costs, what resistance means, what happens when you corner a species that will not break. They taught you to negotiate. They taught us to respect. The observation lounge hummed with recycled air and distant engines. Two species that had tried to destroy each other, now standing side by side, trying to figure out how to coexist. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was human, and Crick's, and possible. Webb smiled. Small, tired. "You know what the funny thing is?" "What?" "We didn't win." "No. But we didn't lose either." "No." Vektash's mandibles clicked softly. "Yeah, you simply refused to accept that losing was inevitable, and that refusal changed everything." "Yeah." Webb looked at his hands, at the scars, at the tremor that would never go away. "That's the human way. We don't know how to quit, even when quitting makes sense, even when the odds say we should. We just keep stepping forward, into danger, into whatever comes next. That is insanity. That's survival." Vektash made a sound that might have been laughter, might have been agreement, might have been the Crick's version of understanding something that couldn't be explained, only experienced. They stood together in the observation lounge while humanity and the Dominion started the long process of learning to be neighbors instead of enemies. It would take time. Decades, probably. Maybe centuries. But both species had learned the same lesson in different ways. That the cost of war was higher than pride. That survival meant adaptation. That respect didn't require submission. And that when you cornered something that refused to break, You had two choices: destroy it completely or learn to live with it. The Dominion had chosen the latter, because they'd seen what happened when you cornered a human. They'd watched Marcus Webb stand in a dead ship with a homemade bomb and dead man eyes and take one step forward while trained soldiers took 3 steps back. They'd watched 17 colonies choose fire over chains. They'd watched farmers and miners and merchants turn their homes into fortresses and their tools into weapons and their desperate stands into legends. And they'd learned what Vektash learned in the Dalathar, that humans don't surrender well, that cornering them doesn't make them weak. It makes them dangerous. Webb left the observation lounge eventually, went back to his quarters, sat in the quiet and thought about the long haul, about the life he'd lived before the Cricks found him, about hauling grain across the outer colonies like the galaxy wasn't on fire. He'd never do that again. The radiation had seen to that. He had years left maybe, not decades. The Cricks medicine had bought him time, but couldn't buy him back what he'd lost. Small price. For carrying the warning. For showing the Dominion what humans were. For taking that first step forward in a dead ship and changing the course of an interspecies war. He smiled in the quiet. They'd thought humans were easy prey. Soft things, brief sparks that burned out quick. Then they trapped one. And learned what cornered really meant. The galaxy was bigger now, more complicated, full of species learning to navigate peace instead of conquest. And somewhere in the dark, humans were still expanding, still building colonies on worlds that should kill them, still fighting impossible odds and somehow surviving, still refusing to quit, still taking that first step forward into whatever came next.